I'm from Oswego.
South Carolina.
South, okay.
West Des Moines.
West Des Moines.
Aiken.
Okay. Where it needs to be, where if we took it up on the elevator, it wouldn't go all the way up. We'd have to carry it some. So, but anyway, they'd stop there. The miller would, using wind power, would lift it up to the.
Yeah.
In the little white facade there, decorations. But the really neat part of it is you could take out that center section there, and she could stand in there to play. I mean, that's you know, it's not a big deal, but it's pretty ingenious. Yeah, it's very clever. I'll talk a little bit here, and then you can wander around. This building in the middle, it's called the Alkmaar Cheese Market. They have a picture of it over on the wall over there. It would be kind of like our farmers markets. The building with the two tall spirals, that's the entrance to the city of Snake on the Snake River. And the reason that's kind of unique is, obviously it's beauty, but about 1,000 years ago, a lot of cities had a wall around them for protection. Well, this was the entrance, and they took down the walls since, obviously, but that's just kind of a neat entrance there. One of the things when you're walking around Pella, you'll notice a lot of the architecture has this kind of stair-step feature on it. You know, Walmart, Arby's, Culver's, anything halfway new, Casey's, they got to put that on it. They make them do that. Back 50 years ago, a lot of obviously buildings didn't. Some of them have a straight line, some have a swoop to it. They made sod huts. There's one out in the village, but they were typically 12 by 16 with a dirt floor. So when the Dutch got here in August, they didn't have time to build a lot of, you know, wooden houses or cut lumber or anything. But the locals that were here showed them how to make sod houses, and they showed, or they don't think there's any examples of anybody freezing that first winter. It was a mild winter, but you know, no deaths recorded. Questions, please ask. This was started and mentioned in the video in 1937-8 WPA project. All these are handmade houses and things. There's no kits or anything here. Just about finished with this green one over here. It wasn't, each year they kind of did one, and they're just about done, but some of them need to go back and be repaired. Time's taking their toll a little bit. Down at the end here, a lot of them were dairy farmers. In German, this is called a Hausbarn. It's a house barn together. I don't know how you say it in Dutch, but that would have been very common. And those of you that are from Iowa, if you would go about 130 or 50 miles west of here in a town called Manning, Iowa,
Yeah.
German community, they did go over and get one and bring it back. So if you're ever over in that area, you can see the German version of that. There's one little house here that's pretty much original, going way back. The rest are all newer. But this one shows a house that's built into the berm or into a dike. It'd be kind of like a berm home that we built here. Then there's one little mill over here that's run by a water wheel. That would be a grist mill instead of a windmill. Does the exact same thing except water power instead of wind power. But one of the other things I want to draw your attention to is this little tiny windmill here. The Netherlands, especially in the center part, is a damp, low climate, and they reclaimed a lot of the soil. And this is kind of how they did it. It's just blades on a shaft with an Archimedes screw in case, so it's an auger. And you have to imagine the outer ring being lower and that being water in there, and water would be pumped up into a trough that goes into a canal then. So that's how they would pump that water. It's a very simple process. We get a lot of people from the Netherlands here, and they still say some of those are being used. I figured they'd use electric pumps, but they can't. Air's free, or wind's free. The mills come about around 1200, is how long they've been in the Netherlands. And of course they started off simple, like that one, and then got more and more complex. Pole vaulting there. Well, that's what we would, excuse me. This is what we would call it. But a lot of the canals, you go back 150, 200 years, they were narrow. They weren't dredged out. And so to get from, if they were hunting or whatever, to get from one place to another, they'd simply what we call pole vault. Now it's a sport over there. Again, had people from the Netherlands say my son tried it and ended up in the canal. So it's not real easy, but that's kind of, they show a little guy doing that there.
Yeah.
I came up a couple of years ago and there was a bunch of Central College students in here. They must have been in some history class or whatever, history presentation. And they had little brushes and those air cans and they were cleaning all this stuff. It took them about a week to do that. You can imagine how tedious that would be.
Yes.
There's wooden shoes with a carrot in them. If they were good boys and girls, the carrot, of course, would be for the horse, but that's how they would get a gift in if they were good. The wooden shoes, not exactly known how it come about, but I mentioned it's a kind of a cool dance. Again, I've had several from Netherlands said they wore like a leather slipper. They would wear that first and then slip their foot in. There's a town called Orange City that's north and west here, and when they come to our Tulip Time Parade, their band marches in those wooden shoes. They have a lot of sponges in there. I'm sure that isn't very easy to do. Did I tell you the admission for the rest of it is a Yarsman? I see the Sax. No, today, Engel, so be sure to ask him questions. So we'll go up, I'll take a group up and then come back and get the rest, and if you'll stay out.
Yeah. Corporate office. Huh? Oh yeah. That's a big blade, isn't it? Yeah.
Now, we're doing it a little bit backwards here because this is right in front of us and we're going to talk about it right now. This is how the miller would move all this stuff. You can see there's an anchor in the wide spaces in the floor here. So if he needs to move this, what he would do is take up those two anchors. You can see the shaft working around the chain here. If he has to move, if the wind's coming from that direction, he'll need to move all this apparatus this direction. So we take this chain out and anchor it somewhere in there, then come back to the captain's wheel and start turning this, and this whole apparatus will just move around one big unit. And the sails will move the opposite direction. So he never has to move it more than 180 degrees. So that's how this part would work.
The wheel, he moves
The whole apparatus, everything up there, from the cap on down, that roundish part up above is what they call the cap. It weighs 25 ton. Each sail is 42 feet long, so the other end 84. If it stopped clear at the top, it would be 126 feet to the ground then. So, yeah, one man can do that. And I made the mistake of saying, it's pretty easy, and I guess it isn't really that easy. You got to work it a little bit. Yeah. So when he
so this, what I've looked, everything here, I'm just trying to understand where it stops.
Yeah, everything there is attached to that rounded red, white, and blue part. That whole thing will turn. It's on those black dowels that I told you about.
But how is that separated from this? Doesn't turn.
Yeah, the whole works turns.
Everything.
Everything.
We're standing.
See, this is not anchored at the bottom.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah, this whole thing will go around that direction.
So how is it separate from getting over here? Or
he'll kind of feather it. He wants to stop with one blade down so he can climb up that. There you heard it kind of grumble a little bit.
It's a 4-section willow brake band. It works real well. And you'll be able to see that on the monitor in there.
Yeah. Let's go around and look at the blade if we can. Up here any day in mill, you have to pick a day for Iowa to mill. We don't mill very often. We only mill about once every 2 months because we're not trying to sell flour. What we do is we put it in plastic buckets and freeze it, and then Yarsma Bakery on the south side of the square, where I tried to get some of her food, but anyway, they come and get it, and they make a wheat bread with it, and it takes them a couple of months to use that up. And then when they're getting kind of low and we get a windy day, the guys get together and have fun. In 1 hour, they can do anywhere from 500 to 1,000 pounds. So it takes a while to use that up then. We just do a wheat. We don't try to do anything else. Maybe he's taken 2 of them off. They got to be balanced, of course. All 4 of them are on right now, but he could have 1 and 3 or 2 and 4. 1 and 3 might be half on or something like that, halfway. But again, notice the sail. It's not straight up and down. It's curved like the sail on a ship. So if Engel has to climb this, what the reason he would have to is on this side. You can come around on either side here, guys. There's a rope on this side of the canvas, and he's got to attach it to these cleats sticking out here. So what he'll have to do is climb up at least halfway or 3/4, and maybe he can flip that rope so that the cleats catch up there. But if he can't, he's got to crawl on up, and then he'll come on down. Then once he's down with it, he'll pull it nice and tight this way, and then there's 3 ropes up there, one about 1/3 of the way, one 2/3. There's 3 ropes back here that he'll tie in slip knots. So this one will be all anchored and fine. And then he'll have to go 90 degrees and do the next one, and the next one, and the next one. It takes him about 5 minutes for each one of these. And then he's got to be keeping an eye out all day for a storm. If he's milling and a storm's coming up, he's got to take all this down in a hurry. So he can do it roughly 5 minutes each and put it back to bed, so to speak, and lock it down. If it's a real windy day, like about 35 mile an hour above, he can take off the canvas, of course, and take off this 1 6-foot board on the end. That's all he can do. We don't have any governors or motors or anything artificial. If it's not windy, you don't mill. If it's too windy, you don't mill. So that's all he can do about it. There's a few modifications. We've obviously added electricity and water protection, because most of them, like I said, fire and lightning was the big thing that destroyed. Come on in a little farther. I showed you the rope downstairs. Here it is on this end. And look at the lower right video over there. You can see where the rope's attached. It comes up to that horizontal spindle then. Now, if the mill is turning, and he'd have to pull the rope again, the big spur wheel would turn. That turns the shaft, the vertical shaft, and then he would pull a rope over here by the doorway, the one with the knots in it. He would pull that, and that lets that horizontal piece drop down on the shaft, and then that's how it will come up. And it's just friction, so there's no teeth or anything that would get torn up if you put too much weight on it. It's just simply friction there. Now the miller, when he's milling, will actually stand right here. The stones are back here, and we'll look at them in a minute. The center there, the grain would come down to the center of the quant, it's called, the vertical one, and it would turn and work its way out to the outside. So that's why when he's standing here, the flour comes on out. Now, you don't want all that grain running down at one time. You want it to kind of think of it as vibrating, come down a little at a time into the center spoke there. These are called shaker controls, and that will control how fast they come down. They're slower depending on what you're doing, or faster. You can mill about it or grind about anything. You could do any kind of grain, or you could do rock pigments in there and make paints, or you could hook up. This is an agricultural mill, of course. It's like every little town in Iowa has a windmill probably, or a grain elevator. This is kind of the same thing. protection. Most things are like they would have been in 1850. There's a few little things. Example, this big spur wheel, it's sitting on a pin on that big beam there, and that's in a little, I think they've used transmission fluid or something in that to keep it lubricated. They would have, any lubricating they would have done in gears and stuff, they would have used beeswax. We use grease. I mean, you know, there's a few modifications, but they wouldn't have to be. How he can have those 16 feet in. Yeah, that heat right. No, you don't want to do that. That's fine. Yeah, come on around a little bit. Can we get everybody in? Is this everyone? I guess so. This would be covered, of course, when they're actually milling. You can see some flour up above here, where it's on the roof. It's kind of dusty. But the stones, each one weighs 3,500 pounds. These are a hardened concrete. They're not, I mean, they might have had granite or something in the day there, but by pushing that down, you raise the lever, lower this part, raise the center part. So look how little effort it takes for me to, it's so well balanced that I can raise that with very little effort.
But
and then
it's going up against the top? That's what's grinding it?
No, the grinding will actually take place down here. I'm not going to get my fingers in there. They would run it real tight. And there's grooves in there, and it works its way out.
Oh, okay.
Where does it go?
Well, no, this has nothing. This is it goes down the hopper to that center post up there. That's what we was looking at in the mirror. Now it works its way out, but this will be closed, and it can't get out except until it gets to that opening over there. So if you're some things you'll want this space to be like a 1/16 of an inch, and other things you might want it higher, depending on what it is. Yeah, how fine you want it. Now, if there's a little pin in the middle, and this thing cast iron piece broke. They show a picture of it here, but. If something breaks, you take off all the wood, and then this part that looks like ice tongs, one goes in here, one goes on the other side, and this mahogany piece, you turn that crank and it's like a crane. It just lifts that big stone up. So they thought of how to repair it, not only make it, but that's how it would be repaired too. But yeah, you could grind about anything. You could turn on about anything at all.
21st century question. How do you clean this, or do you just leave the
No,
drain there?
it takes them a couple hours. They come up with vacuums and dust it and everything, yeah. But they always like to leave this part so you can see. Yeah. And it's not terribly dirty. I mean, I grew up.
Dark in here. Not much to this. Is it just a storage?
What I wanted to point out here's the rope again, and when as the lady pushed the lever down, the center counterweight is there. These beams, everything from the ceiling down came from the States. These beams came from Washington State. They were specially cut and kiln dried for this project. Then we have buckets over here. When we, like I said, they'll put the wheat in there. When they're all done with it, they freeze it. We have a device under the sheet here that's a modern device you plug in. They would not have had that separates the chaff from the flour itself then. So here's one set of stones and here's another one. They both just run off this same spur wheel there. So that's how it would be then. This one says it's a lumber yard. And again, I'm hearing this not long ago, but think about it. If they had lumber mills early on, they had boards for building ships. Now I don't know how other countries did that. Maybe they used the water wheels. But to cut boards, I'd never really given that any thought. But anyway, if they had lumber mills early on, well, obviously they might have been in
Living quarters. Cute.
Now this would be the living quarters for a man or a man and his wife, and when again people come from the Netherlands, they say it's too big. Looks pretty small to me, but the country I said was cool and damp. They would have had a wood stove. They probably, just a small one, they would have burnt peat or coal. One of the things, excuse me just a minute, let me show you this thing. This is kind of an important little piece of furniture, even though you wouldn't necessarily think so. It's a foot warmer. And it would have had a metal tray in here. They always lost those things. But the metal tray in here, you take some coals from the fire and put in the tray, or a brick or a rock or whatever, put it in here, and then you can imagine Mom with a quilt over her legs, reading, sewing, whatever, Dad too. And then when they would eat, the table here shows lace on top, but it has a rug, and the rug would have come down farther, and you could slip this underneath there while they're eating to stay warm. It's not like the whole room is really, toasty. It's always just takes a chill off. The stada, or the bed area, this particular one has a little door underneath where you could slip this underneath there as well, but they probably didn't do that very much. The stada is very small, so body heat after a while would just simply warm the area. The Dutch, and I have no idea why, thought it was bad for your health to lay flat, so they slept at an incline. So there's a bunch of pillows on one side, and then your feet against the wall on the other side. When those first 800 and the next 300, and this one has some decorations on the top, but the point is they brought a lot of wooden trunks. They didn't have suitcases or knapsacks necessarily. I mean, they would have had something like that, but they would stack easily in a ship or in a covered wagon. Most of them were just their clothes and a few tools. They might have had some hand tools in there. They might have had a couple of these even. But over at the Schulte house, I haven't been over there for a long time, but they put all their gold in one trunk. They brought gold because the Netherlands money wouldn't have been any good here. But where the neat thing about it has a lot of metal around it. Look at the black board over there. In the upper left, you can see the kind of the steps of how things work. They did a concrete tower, and then they put the mill together out on the lawn outside here, and then used a crane to set it up. Here's the brochures. One of the other things I want to point out is this little cart. Now, this one doesn't worry about the painting, but in 1850s, there were no stores like we think of it. A vendor would have went down the street. Some of them would have had a cover over this. Some were propelled with a bicycle on the back end. But that's how, selling food, chickens, flowers, sharpen your skates, whatever you needed, some vendor come by and shout, and that's what he would do. On Thursday, there will be about 40,000, Friday about 50,000, and Saturday about 100,000. I would recommend you come on Thursday.
First weekend in May.
The whole issue is parking. I mean, there's plenty of food, and you can see the parades and all this stuff. But it's a crowd. But it's a really great celebration, and that time in the spring or each fall, they'll plant between 300 and 350,000 tulips each fall. They put new ones in every year. And I was always kind of wondering why, because I remember my mom planting them and leaving for a few years. But I after tulip time's over, they die back, anybody can go dig them up. And I dug up 100 of them last year just to see once. And out of that 100, about 8 or 10, the leaves come up, but there was no flower. And so they want perfect tulips, so to speak, every year. And so they put new ones in every single year. So it's quite expensive. But the neat thing is they're just in the process of putting in annual plants. And if you come back in about August, it's really awesome. It's better than the tulips. You didn't hear that from me, but anyway.
Yeah, well, that's okay. Quite an impressive structure there. The top 4 floors was imported and the bottom floor were not? I didn't quite get that. Okay.
Yeah, there's some point.
Some
I think
point.
from where the deck is off was imported. That or where
And then the workers came from Holland. They disassembled it over there and brought it over here and reassembled.